Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today to the Magnet Summit 2022. Today, my name is Trey, Amick, and with me I have Tim McAnnany from Qualcomm. Thanks for joining in today, Tim, and doing this with us. But we're going to be talking today about Magnet Automate Enterprise, which we launched earlier this year. And we're going to really talk about how to streamline your workflow, your investigations, within that corporate setting, and really kind of dig into that and really, we want to kind of talk about what Qualcomm does and gone from there. So to kick things off today, let me go ahead and pass the floor over to Tim so he can introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Trey. My name is Timothy McAnnany. I'm a cyber investigator at Qualcomm. I work on the cyber investigations team. Before that, I was a counterintelligence special agent with the U.S. Army, did a lot of stuff in the U.S., did the deployment to Afghanistan, but been in IT most of my adult life. Yeah.
Awesome. And if you need to reach out to Tim afterwards, there is his LinkedIn and email as well. And then quickly, I'll introduce myself. So my name is Trey Amick. I'm the director of the forensic consultant team here at Magnet. There's my email, LinkedIn, Twitter, however you might want to reach out. I've been with Magnet now since 2018. My background is a little varied, spending some time in corporate investigations. We did, education awareness training as well. Through college, worked at Apple, so definitely love my Apple products. And then prior to going into corporate investigations, I worked in law enforcement, kind of working up through patrol, working my fair share of white collar to crimes against people and on to ITAC investigations. But please don't hesitate to reach out if you ever need anything. We're more than happy to help. But with that, let's go ahead and kind of jump into it. So to start, we want to talk about the problem and really why Magnet said, hey, there's a need here, and let's see if we can kind of fill that need with Magnet Automate Enterprise. So, to start off with what that problem and what we were seeing, was and the challenges faced by enterprise labs. We wanted to reduce the number of touch points and just really the waste of time, having to have just an investigator simply hit next or, check to see if an endpoint was online and, waiting for them, quite frankly, to, come in to start their shifts, on a daily basis when maybe an incident had started, a couple hours earlier, which really kind of rolls into responding to, security events faster and being able to mitigate some of that damage and, trying to work through how we could absolutely, do that, but also, give a tool to the forensics team that they can, work into their workflows as well and not say, hey, we're going to change your entire ecosystem and your entire, SOP for how you work investigations, but how you can use additional tools to really help expedite some of that. We want to be able to get the most out of the DFIR tools as well. And, everyone at Magnet, all of our examiners, we all talk about toolbox approach. There's not just one tool out there. We all use a variety of tools. And, we wanted that to be, front and center when we start talking about, additional tools and, having, automation and orchestration tools to help with your computing and your analysis for investigations. And really, we've got managing growth from data volumes that are, getting increasingly larger. The data, sources are very diversified from IoT devices to, you're doing forensics in the cloud, you're doing forensics of the cloud. So whether you're collecting from S3 or maybe Microsoft Azure VM, you need a tool that can process all of that information and do it in a timely manner. And really, lastly, giving insights to the lab management to be able to have better resourcing decisions about your lab and the amount of throughput and the data that you're using, your return on your investment for the hardware that you have in your lab currently, and then also how you can easily scale with newer technology. So those are some of the challenges that we kind of identified when we started talking about how can we meet some of these challenges for our enterprise and corporate customers. And really, that's where Magnet comes in. We want to automate and orchestrate your digital forensic tool and your task, and really have a purpose-built tool for enterprises. So concurrent collection, processing evidence from multiple targets and sources to really get to the why and being able to limit damage and mitigate damage if you are encountering a breach or an insider threat investigation, and being able to do that in a timely manner. So talking about just a couple of the key features, and we're going to dig into these a little bit more, and then we're going to have Tim kind of talk about how Qualcomm has done this as well. responding to those security events, faster. We want to reduce that downtime. We really want to automate as much of this process as we can. And that's not the automating the analysis. That's automating the, clicking next, and sitting waiting for your target endpoint to come online. Or, oh, they're not connected to the internal network via VPN. What are the processes there that you have in place to still be able to get that acquisition? We want to be able to collect data at scale. So once again, having multiple target endpoints and specify the data that you want to collect and process off of each one of those, at a larger scale versus the standard ad hoc approach that Acting Cyber would be, which would be kind of a one-off instance. But in ultimately focusing in on those high-value tasks, having examiners actually do the data analysis, not clicking next and waiting for processing to happen, or once again trying to track down where log files are and trying to figure out how best to complete analysis on those. But have a tool that you can build and grow with and continue adapting your technology with as a part of all this process. And that's where, once again, would love to get Tim's thoughts on this, but definitely something that we wanted to focus on when we were talking about automated enterprise.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the benefits here that actually isn't listed is the fact that automated enterprise is an off-the-shelf tool from Magnet, because anyone who's used a homegrown tool knows the headaches involved in that, updating for vulns, adapting it for the future, making those little small changes that always happen. I mean, in fact, at Qualcomm, we used to have a tool that did something sort of similar. It would help us with pulling memory dumps and volatile information for incident response. And that was back when memory dumps were 4 gig, maybe a big memory dump was 16 gig. But we had that, and it was a nice little automated process. Wasn't very comprehensive, but it worked. But then the person who was maintaining it left, and it just kind of died out there on the vine. So what Automate Enterprise can bring you is that it's basically their job to maintain that tool. They're keeping an eye on it. They're updating it, addressing any vulnerabilities. They're going in and keeping an eye out on those future problems and always addressing, okay, what's next? What are we thinking of? So Automated Enterprise there is a significant value to that. So
yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of corporations have that build versus buy mentality, and it tends to sway back and forth on what you do there. But I mean, you hit the nail right on the head with the build mentality, which oftentimes works great for a lot of organizations, but there comes a time where the core team that initially built something, or the core person, for that matter, who wrote the script or built the core product that the organization's been relying on, gets transferred or gets promoted or just leaves and retires, and then you're kind of stuck with like, well, who in the past, and everybody's kind of looking at each other, because they never had to build or maintain that, and that's where having that buy mentality of like, hey, we can have an off-the-shelf product that is being updated, and you do have that direct support to assist when you need to change your tools and change your workflows and kind of build that out. So yeah, great point there. So talking about some of the other benefits of automated enterprise and what we can do, we want to be able to automatically process and create exports for all different types of evidence, and we want to do that in parallel. So essentially, we want to, if your investigation kicks off and you've got multiple endpoints, maybe from the same user, maybe you have cloud data, you've got maybe their mobile phone, you've got their SharePoint and their OneDrive, and then you also have their endpoint. Being able to process all of that at the same time versus putting it in a queue, essentially, how we've normally done forensics for a very long time, where essentially you have Axiom or your product of choice, and you start with one piece of evidence, and after that's done, you go on to the next one and the next one. And yeah, it can absolutely get done, but being able to really process and do analysis in parallel so that it's all getting done at the same time is a huge benefit. And essentially having computing and forensic tools that can run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is fantastic, because I know both from the law enforcement perspective, but also the corporate perspective, I would come in on the weekends and, at night because I knew, hey, imaging was done or there was a, big processing case that I knew I just needed to simply hit next to kick off the next part of the process. And being able to have a tool that will orchestrate and do all that for you. So once again, when your examiners come in, they're just left with, hey, here's the analysis and let's get to work on that. And being able to leverage, the workstations, whether you're talking, the physical workstations that you already have or cloud-based resources, and being able to scale really at will. If you have a large, security incident, you need to, scale your library quickly. Having a tool that can automate and orchestrate a lot of that is pretty phenomenal there.
So let me just go ahead and add to that cloud deployment part. It can also give you a lot of flexibility as well. So as you may know, Qualcomm's a global company. We have locations all over the place. We're also in the process of setting up some infrastructure for collections in the cloud, AWS. But the basic concepts are pretty simple. Instead of having the computer on site connected to your network, you have it connected up through Amazon's network. And you can create an AMI or what have you and just spin up as many as you need to do your collections. It also gives you the opportunity to do off-network collections, which is a capability that, since a lot of folks have shifted to a work from home or a hybrid environment, really, really is important, because otherwise you're waiting for them to get on VPN or come back to the office, and it just adds so much flexibility to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, with people being remote now, I know, pre-COVID, it was always a challenge to, get the collection done while people were bouncing from meeting to meeting in different, meeting rooms all day, every day. And now the challenge is, migrated to, hey, maybe they're not on VPN or, connecting every day, all day, and having the ability to do off-network collections on top of the parallel processing and all is a huge benefit. And being able to do that, within cloud environments, whether it's AWS or, Azure, it also really helps magnify, the amount of data that you can process when you need to and be able to scale, at ease for sure. And, as we keep looking at stuff, being able to build a streamlined workflow as well and having different workflows for different types of incidents, it is really important here. And I love the workflow builder that Automate Enterprise has, where simply you can just create the workflow. And really, I like to tell people, use your imagination here. What would make your life easier, and how can you, either write the scripts or find some Python, scripts that are doing what you want it to do. Use your imagination on how you can create, the best workflows for your environment, because, you and your team are going to know what would work best for your environment. And I, definitely want to get Tim's thoughts here, but, being able to seamlessly integrate, lots of your forensic tools, but also think about your EDR tools, and essentially having alerts kick off from those EDR platforms, and then, those alerts automatically starting workflows within Automate Enterprise. And I think that really then, it creates a very quick cycle for being able to do an acquisition and having that processing done so that the examiners can jump straight in to work on mitigation and root cause analysis versus having to, let the, higher ups, say, hey, by the way, we're still trying to get access. We haven't, been able to process the image yet or acquire it. Having all that automated, so when that initial, incident kicks off from the EDR, and having that built out in a workflow could really pay dividends for, a lot of organizations.
Yeah, and one of the best things about Automate Enterprise is how easy it makes it. I mean, you can see the workflow builder there. It gives you a really good way on how to visualize that organization. So you don't need a computer science degree or anything like that to actually use it. While I will admit that knowing some scripting or coding really can be a benefit, almost a force multiplier, but as long as you can call it via the command line, it'll do it. I mean, heck, you can even use batch scripts if that's what you're comfortable writing, and just calling anything on the command line.
Yep, absolutely. I'm not a coder, but some basic scripting, understanding some Python, and if you have CLI access to tools for APIs and all, we can absolutely work with that to build out those customized workflows for your environment. Absolutely. And then a couple of years ago, we launched Axiom Cyber. We had the ad hoc deployment, one-to-one essentially. We've been evolving, obviously, with Automate Enterprise. We want to be able to do multiple endpoints in parallel and still keep that ad hoc approach where we're creating and deploying agents, but in addition to that, being able to, also get them in parallel and having multiple endpoints that we can collect from. So, think about, you have your initial orchestration tool, you're able to deploy to multiple endpoints, have those processing across all the various nodes that you've stood up for your Automate Enterprise environment. And that's all being run in parallel. So once again, at the end, you've got your case file, you can go ahead and start your investigation versus saying, well, I processed, the hard drive in Axiom process. Now I want to process it in X ways and run it through some custom scripts before I can get started. Do it all in parallel and have that remote collection capability where we can go ahead and deploy the agent via Automate Enterprise. We can collect it, we can get the process for you. You've had all this built out in workflows, so it's very good selecting, entering your IP information for those targets, and having that all kick off. And once again, as Tim talked about, having some basic scripting and being able to script out, some of this as well, so that if you have an EDR platform that has an alert on multiple endpoints, for us to be able to then call that EDR tool to get that information, and then to be able to deploy those agents for those collections can really be a huge benefit as well here.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and bring up a small little bit of a anecdote, I guess, about Qualcomm. So at Qualcomm, we tend not to pre-deploy stuff because we have a lot of security infrastructure in place, and a lot of security infrastructure tends to have those endpoint agents. And every time we want to put an endpoint agent, we have to, for lack of a better term, fight with the desktop admin folks because they're always complaining it slows everything down. So when we deploy things, it tends to be as necessary. So when we're working with the Magnet folks on some of the early Automate, we're talking about how we can go about deploying it. So we were talking about how we use our EDR tool to deploy our endpoint agent. And that was a very interesting concept because we ended up working with them to be able to leverage that kind of workflow to deploy our EDR tool, because that EDR tool gave us a live response capability where we weren't forced to use our credentials to log in to run the agent. It might give you some OPSEC help as far as not disclosing that you're on that computer. And plus, you're just, even if it's an incident related item, you don't want to necessarily burn your credentials and potentially allow an attacker to get those credentials because you logged in, because you were on that system trying to deploy and get information on it.
Yep, absolutely. And that's where, so wanted to cover off, some of the benefits and, how you can use Automate Enterprise, but really I want to now take it and, Tim, I'm going to, let's dig in a little bit deeper here and really what you all have done and, some of the benefits you've seen, kind of just dig into that a little bit more. So take it away.
So a lot of what I wanted to talk about was kind of how do you use Automate, and how us at Qualcomm, we're looking at automating a lot of our processes. So when you're thinking about automation, you want to think about, okay, what are those processes that are repetitive? What are those processes that have simple decisions based on known criteria? Like Trey said, it's when do you hit that next button? Everything needs to be consistent. I mean, it works better if you have consistency, so you know what the outcomes are going to be. Granted, there are going to be times where you want to keep processing human. When you have complex or important decisions, when you're looking at the whole thing, when you're trying to communicate complex ideas. So if you have to bring something up to management, it's not necessarily something you want automate an automation process around. But those are generally pretty easy to identify because you generally want that human element in there. Next. So the easiest thing I found as far as trying to break down processes and trying to figure out what works to automate is just take a process and figure out what it is at its smallest piece. You have your input, you have your process, your output. So in my head, I kind of have, you get a thing, you do something to that thing, and then you use the results of that. So when you can break that down, it makes it a lot easier to figure out where your processes are, where you can benefit that, and especially where you can bring in that parallelism. That parallelism can be something like, for example, on the slide here, you have things like collecting volatile data and collecting data from your scene. And you're talking about deploying agents, and then you're talking about collecting memory, maybe getting specific files. So which of those requires something to start? So collecting volatile data, if you're using your EDR tool, maybe that's the way you get your volatile data. Does that depend on the agent being deployed? No. So it can be kind of off on its own. Same thing with collecting data from your scene. That doesn't necessarily need the agent. So that can be off on its own. That can be a parallel process. However, when you talk about collecting memories, collecting memory, collecting files and such, that's where you start depending on different things. So that's when the parallel processing, I don't want to say breaks down, but becomes less possible. You start becoming more serial when that happens. And when that happens, you're thinking about things that are depending on external factors, or just one result is another input. So breaking those down really helps kind of organize things. So if we go to the next slide, kind of show you what we did with one of our workflows, and it's basically an IR triage workflow. So you can see how, like, going across from left to right, consider that like serial operation. So those have to kind of happen one right after another. Going down, you have parallel processes. So those can happen independently, more or less, of anything else that's going on, or it's depending on a separate workflow. But you can see how when you start, one of the first things that we want to do is run some scripts, do some basic data collection on the information we already have that is not on this, that is already in our SIEM tool, already in logs. And that can, a lot of SIEM tools have an API, so you can use REST, Python, whatever, to run searches, collect those, put them in whatever format you want, and then toss it in the case folder so it's ready for the analyst or the responder to review when they want to review it. And then while that's happening, you can also kick off a live data collection. So part of that is, like, for example, with our EDR tool, we want to do that first because you're talking about forensic collection on an active device. You kind of want to go through that least possible means to get that information. The less heavy-handed you are on it, the better your evidence is. So, and that depends on organization, et cetera. Sometimes it can be done differently depending on the needs of the organization. But you generally want to get your volatile data, put that, send it to the case folder, and then using also the EDR, we run that script to deploy it to the system in question. We can kick off a memory dump, and that memory dump gets saved off onto the case folder. And while that is going on, we can start running volatility. You can use almost whatever plugins you want, whatever tools you want to analyze that memory dump. And while all that is happening, all that analysis is taking place back on your own systems, you can kick off a process that goes out and grabs specific files, or even if you wanted to, a full disk image. But you get those files, you bring them back, and then you can kick off processes that will put them through, say, Axiom process or Reg Ripper, or even just run strings on it, or put it in your sandbox and see what results you get out of that. And basically, and all of those different pieces can happen kind of at the same time. So you have your memory collection, and then while all the memory is being analyzed, you can do your disk collection, and then that can get analyzed. So the whole idea is the analyst or the responder doesn't even have to do anything until the evidence hits the case folder and it's ready. And even using Automate Enterprise, you can use a little small script to send you an email, kick off a small script to send you an email or some sort of other notification, a page, what have you, to say, hey, stuff's ready. You can build that into almost any part of the process. One of the things we were looking at, because we like to know where things are in the process, is just building in some status triggers that say, okay, this is done, go and do this, or this is done, we're now working on this. So you can see how you can take a complex entity like IR work or IR triage and kind of break it down to those smaller pieces. And you can do this with pretty much almost any process, any procedure, just breaking it down, running it. Trey, did you have anything to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I love this, and like, I mean, you just said it. You can do this pretty much with anything, and I mean, at the end of the day, especially, you know, when we're talking about having certifications and SOPs and, you know, all that in place, and being able to say, hey, this is how we work every, you know, one of our cases with the different types, whether it's data loss prevention or, you know, you're working, you know, a breach, you know, whatever the case may be, or, you know, some sort of HR violation. Having that workflow and being able to say, we can adjust as necessary, but this is the basis for all of that, and we can, you know, like you said, and I love that, you know, you have scripts that alert you when everything's done. It's basically kind of like the, you know, kitchen timer going off saying, hey, everything's, you know, ready to go, ready for you to come in and, you know, do your thing now, but we've done it all, and that's awesome. I think I really like this triage workflow to kind of walk through that, and that's really cool. And that's, you know, kind of moving over to the next slide. You know, this is another example, you know, not as detailed as, you know, what Tim just highlighted, but, you know, with data loss prevention and kind of that old workflow versus new workflows of essentially, you know, if you have 10 employees who have access to a file that, you know, or data that might be, you know, leaving, trying to figure out, you know, the source DLP, what can you do here? And there's a lot of manual intervention here. You know, with the old workflow, you've got each device with a lot of downtime in between each one of those, and having to deploy agents and collect from those, not to mention then processing all of it and then completing your analysis and reporting, which once again, there's just lots of manual endpoints here. You know, and with that new workflow, you've got your targets, you put in your target information, you're able to collect all that evidence in parallel. It's all being processed and then dumped into an MSDB file or a database file, you know, that you can open up and, you know, act and examine to go ahead and start doing your analysis and reporting. So that front-loaded part of that workflow, I tell you, was the most time-intensive part of most of our investigations. It wasn't like, you know, who did what when. It was getting to the evidence, getting it processed, getting all the different pieces of evidence because of the number of endpoints that, you know, some people might have, and they'll provide that, and being able to consolidate all that down very quickly, I think is, you know, awesome. I know we talked about. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah. So I mean, it basically you're trying to reduce that waste time, and use your investigators where they're used best. I mean, use them for the important stuff, not to press buttons.
Exactly.
I mean, you get a lot of folks to press buttons. And one side benefit of it is you're also increasing the consistency. So if it comes up in court and they say, well, how do you do this? Well, it's all automated to do this. This is exactly what it does every time. You get that repeatability of that evidence, should that be necessary.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I love that. And I think that's something that, you know, might get overlooked initially when you're thinking about automation and orchestration, but having a repeatable workflow for every case really helps. And especially, you know, like I mentioned, if you're licensing certified, things like that, you need that repeated process. And, you know, this can do that for you very easily here. I mean, this was another one, and we'll kind of end with this one, but, you know, an IR SOAR integration, essentially having, you know, the EDR tool has detected malware on endpoints, you know, and reported an event to the, you know, scene tool. What can you do from there? Well, essentially the old workflow, there's, you know, an alert going from one tool to another, going to the SOAR, you know, the alerts are coming in, whether they're from dashboards or emails that are coming in. But then there's that downtime of like, hey, now we got to get to the target endpoint. We got to do the collection. Now we've got to wait for that process. Let's have all of that kind of connected where, the EDR might kick it off, but then it's getting moved through that process very quickly with APIs, including with, Automate Enterprise and having that automatic collection and processing. So once again, you're basically getting an alert saying, hey, there was an alert from the EDR platform. We've already got the evidence for you. It's already been processed. You can sit there and do the analysis versus, playing catch up on all these other tools that are, connected and, piecing everything together. Have the automation and orchestration for your forensic tools as well so that, when you walk in, you can have that done and be ready to go for your analysis and reporting. Because at the end of the day, you're going to brief the stakeholders and the higher ups as to, how it's been mitigated and the root cause analysis to make sure everything's been shored up for an investigation. So there's a lot you can do with, automation and orchestration. Automate Enterprise is here to, work with the tools you're already using. And I think that's the big piece to this. And, just like, Tim was talking about in the slide before with, your repeated workflows, and really you can have a workflow for just about anything and for any type of investigation. And, with a little bit of, scripting knowledge, some basic scripts, you can amplify, what you're able to do very, very quickly and easily with that. So I know we're right at time, but we're going to be around for questions. If anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I want to thank Qualcomm and Tim for joining us today. But with that, anything last words of wisdom?
Nope, that pretty much covers it.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all and enjoy the Magnet Summit 2022. Hopefully we'll see you in person very soon.
Thanks all.